Hello, my name is Pedro. I'm going to talk about the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, enslaved, and how learning how to read changed his life. First, I'm going to talk about the transformation of Douglass' new mistress, Sophia Aud. Then I'll explain how learning to read changed Douglass' life and became one of the biggest reasons of why he was able to gain his freedom. Um, One of the things that stood out for me in the entire book is the story of the Sophia Aud, really the lady that really helped him to get his first touch, get his first connection to reading. When Douglas first arrived in Baltimore, he never really experienced kindness from a white slave owner before. He described Sophia Aud as someone with the kindest heart and the finest feelings. She smiled at him and treated him with respect, even started teaching with the alphabet. That was something completely different from what Douglas had experienced in his life as a slave. At first she simply saw him as another human being. She didn't immediately see him as only as a property. But everything changed after her husband, Hug Out, found out that she was teaching Douglas how to read. Immediately, uh, stopped. He immediately stopped the lessons and told her that teaching a slave to read was dangerous. Was dangerous. He basically argued that if a slave learned to read, he would never be satisfied with being a slave again. And in the book, it's used the phrase "would forever unfit him to be a slave." I think that's one of the most important one of the most important of phrases in the entire book. After that conversation, Douglas says that slavery slowly changed Sophia Aud, and he writes that the fatal poison of responsible power completely transformed her personality. The same woman who had once been kind became angry, suspicious, and cruel. She even started taking newspapers away from him because she didn't want him reading anymore. What I found out interesting is that Douglas doesn't simply blame Sophia as an individual. Instead, he's making much bigger argument. He's saying that enslaved corrupts everyone involved. He destroys the lives of the enslaved people, but he also changes the character of the people who own slaves. I think that's one of the strongest messages in the book because it shows that slavery wasn't just a system that hurt one group of people. It also encouraged people to become cruel and to accept behavior that probably would have considered wrong before becoming slave owners. The second question shows is about learning to read and how it affected Douglas. In my opinion, this is the most important theme in the entire autobiography. At first, learning to read seems like a small thing. Sophia only teaches the alphabet and some simple words, but after Hug Out stopped the lessons, Douglas realized something very important. He understood that education is connected to freedom. Um, and everything changes when Douglas writes. And I wrote in here, and from that moment, understood the pathway from slavery to freedom. Before that, he knew slavery was terrible, but he didn't fully understand why slave owners wanted to keep enslaved people uneducated. Once he realized that reading gave him people knowledge and independence, he became determined to teach himself no matter how difficult it was. I actually thought it was really impressive how creative he became. Since no one was allowed to teach anymore, he made friends with poor white people in the neighborhood. Whenever he had extra bread, he traded for reading lessons instead of giving them money. He gave them food, and in return, they taught him words and letters. He also practiced writing by copying letters he saw at the shipyard and by using the copybooks of his master's son whenever nobody was watching. As he read more books, especially the Columbia Orator, he learned about freedom, justice, and human rights. Those ideas completely changed the way he viewed slavery. At the same time, Douglas explains that learning to read also made him suffer more emotionally. Before he could read, He knew he was a slave, but he didn't fully understand how deeply injustice, how deeply the system was, and how deeply unjust was the system. After he became educated, he could no longer ignore his the situation. Even even he says there were moments when he wished that he never learned to read because knowledge made him more aware of his suffering. He describes feeling trapped because he could clearly see what freedom was, but he still couldn't reach it. I thought that part was really powerful because it shows that knowledge isn't always comfortable. Sometimes learning the truth makes life harder and become before it makes it better. Even though reading caused him pain, he also gave him hope. He helped him understand that slavery was not a natural thing, and that freedom was possible for him. He also gave him the confidence to begin planning his escape. Without learning to read, I honestly don't think Douglas would have become the leader and the writer that he became. To finish, and to finish my thoughts in here, I really believe these two questions are connected. Sophia Hall's transformation shows how slavery changed people morally, while Douglas' education shows that knowledge can challenge oppression. One of the biggest lessons I took from this book was that slavery depend on controlling both people's bodies and their minds. Slave owners understood that education could threat the entire system, and that's exactly why they try so hard to prevent enslaved people from learning. Uh, once Douglas learned to read, his mind was already free long before he escaped physically. Overall, I will enjoy reading this autobiography. It wasn't always an easy book because some parts were too emotional, and he's describing his feelings. He's describing slavery, which is a really bad thing, and we already know on the amount of the bad things that happened during that time. But I think hearing the story directly from someone who actually lived through slavery makes it much more powerful and than simply reading about slavery in a history textbook. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, just email it to me.